Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to say ahoy or land ho and not feel weird about it. So here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance offers access to the largest towing fleet on the water. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to say, shiver me timbers, and not feel weird about that either. Get more with Geico.
This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I'm Sam Abuel Samad.
So we're going to talk about the Volvo XC40 T5, the Audi Q5, and the Kia Stinger GT2. That's what we're driving. And we're also going to talk about GM deciding to pull the plug on book, Faraday Futures Rocky Week.
Or Faraday's lack of future.
Well, yeah, it's been about a week, right? 10 days? I don't know.
Yeah.
They've made a lot of news lately, inadvertently.
Yeah.
And then Ford
none of it
and
good.
Walmart doing, yeah, right, exactly. Like you said, lack of future. Ford and Walmart doing AV deliveries and some VW speculation, and we'll answer some emails. But let's get back to the cars. And so the biggest question I have about the XC40 T5, and this is what I ask anytime I know somebody has driven one: did it have the red interior?
No.
Or like,
I have
the red carpet.
I have yet to see an XC40 with a red interior. The one I had the off-white sort of ivory colored interior, which was quite nice. Definitely, probably, almost certainly something you would not want to have if you have young children, or if you like to eat in the car. Definitely not a good choice there. But otherwise, very, very attractive. The XC40, is the newest addition to the Volvo lineup, and it's the first model off their compact modular architecture. So they have Volvo now, is now completely devoid of all their old Ford era architectures. All that stuff's gone, and everything is now on one of two architectures: the SPA, the scalable platform architecture, which is for the 60 and 90 series vehicles, and the CMA, or compact modular architecture, for the 40 series. And it's also going to be shared with models from Lynk & Co., another brand from Geely, which is the parent company that owns Volvo Cars, at least. Not Volvo Trucks, but just Volvo Cars.
They do own a good bit of Volvo Trucks, too, from what I understand.
I think they have a minority investment. I think it's like no more than about 10% of Volvo Trucks.
Okay.
But Volvo Car and Volvo Trucks split, back in, 89, I think, when Ford originally bought
99.
Volvo. No, it was earlier than that.
Maybe it was. I thought they split before the Ford deal, right? And the Ford deal was 98 for 99. So maybe they split before that.
I thought it was 89. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's not important.
Well, we're being geeky though.
That's true. Anyway. So the XC40 is, Volvo's entry into the burgeoning compact premium crossover segment, going up against the likes of the Cadillac XT4 and the Lexus NX and the Audi Q3 and BMW X1 and countless others. And it's got it's got some of the signature design elements that you see on the larger 60 and 90 series models, but it overall it's got things like the Thor's Hammer signature headlights and the tail light design, but the rest of it is quite distinctly different. It's got a much chunkier, blockier look than the XC60 or 90, and I kind of like it. It's kind of cool. It's different, and doesn't look like every other compact crossover. So it's a good look, and I especially like it, in one of the various two-tone paint schemes. So you can get it with a white roof. I think there's also a couple of variants with a black roof. I can't remember, but all of the XC40s are powered by Volvo's 2-liter Drive E 4-cylinder engines. The T4s are naturally aspirated, and the T5s have a turbocharger, just like the T5s on the bigger models. 248 horsepower, 258 foot-pounds of torque. Plenty of power, plenty of torque. Drives really well. Inside, this is typical modern Volvo, which in many ways is good, but not always. It still has the same Sensus infotainment system with the 9-inch portrait format, touchscreen, 3-page layout. And we have bitched and moaned about that, repeatedly in the past.
I have. I certainly
said
have.
we both have. And
to the point where I don't know how much he knew that I've been so vocal about it, but I got in the car with Russell Datz, who is
really?
Volvo's guy.
Yeah.
And he was like, no, Dan. Here's how Sensus is supposed to work. And he gave me a really cogent explanation where it's divided into now, which is everything sort of in front of the driver, the cluster.
Right, that's kind of the middle of the 3 screens, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And then anything that you have to actually touch the touchscreen for and not use the voice commands or the steering wheel controls, that's for not now. That's for later. Or not driving time.
Well,
and when you explain it that way,
if you are listening to the radio and you decide you want to listen to a podcast or some streaming app or something, in CarPlay or Android Auto, now you have to swipe away from that now screen and go and select those.
You do, or
you wait until you stop and then you can change the channel?
No. So you use the voice commands, or you can switch sources, right? With it's got the little rotary thingies in the steering wheel, right? It's like the little thumb wheel that you press too.
I don't believe you can activate, the smartphone projection with that. That'll let you.
Oh, I see.
So, like, you can change between AM and FM or satellite radio or Bluetooth streaming that way,
right.
But you can't. I don't believe you can change the to go into the smartphone projection. And also
that makes sense.
If you want to, for example, change the audio settings, if you were listening to some music and had it in concert hall mode and you want to switch it over to normal mode to listen to some audio, some spoken word stuff, you still have to go over to the other screen, so it's, there are times, I understand what Russell's saying, and I understand the basic principle of it. I just don't think that it necessarily works as well in practice as it does in theory.
And it's one of those interesting things to sort of get walked through it by the folks who have that inside line, right? Like this is the philosophy that we followed when we designed and built the system. And when it's explained that way, it makes a lot more sense. Whether or not it actually works as well in practice as it does in explanation is another thing, but I haven't been in a Volvo since Russell and I took a little ride together, so I'm eager to try it out and set the presets and act a little bit more like an owner the next time I get one, and try to just get real comfortable with Sensus and see if that makes a difference. Because man, we gave Casey so much crap about it.
Yeah, we did.
It's still not my favorite.
Yeah. For what it's worth, and I didn't have. It's been several months since I drove another Volvo, so it's hard to do a direct comparison. But it did seem like this one was a little more responsive, a little faster. I don't know if they've made some tweaks in the software to speed it up, or maybe it's running a slightly faster processor behind the scenes. But it did seem a little more responsive than prior Sensus implementations that I've tried. It still looked exactly the same. It was the same interface, but it just seemed to run a little bit quicker. So leave that for whatever it's worth. The only other thing that really bothered me about the XC40 is the gear selector. they have on the XC40, they have adopted the same electronic gear shift mechanism that is on the 60 and 90 plug-in hybrids. Rather than the mechanical gear selector that you find on the non-hybrid versions of the bigger models, this is the short stubby shifter that is just, it's an electronic switch. There's no, it's not mechanically tied to the transmission at all. And as on the hybrids, I don't know if you can hear that siren. There's a lot of those here in Miami tonight for some reason.
You're in Miami.
Yeah. Anyway, it has the same kind of behavior as the hybrids, where it, as with most of these electronic shifters, it always returns to center after you do something. But on most other implementations, it's one push forward or back or to the side to go from park to one of the other positions. But on Volvo's implementation, for some reason, if you push it forward, back one time or pull it back one time, that pops you into neutral from park.
Yep.
And so you actually have to go forward twice to get reverse, or pull it back towards you twice to get drive. And I know that for an owner, they would probably get accustomed to that, and finally start getting accustomed to it towards the end of my week with it. But it still seems like a less than ideal design, less than ideal interface for that. If you tap it one time, if you're coming out of a traditional vehicle where you pull the shifter, back, from park to one position to reverse, and then it's usually park to reverse to neutral to drive. That's usually the way it works. And even on most electronic ones, as I said, one tap in one direction or the other gets you from park to reverse or to drive or to neutral. And this one, it's a lot easier to inadvertently end up in neutral and have the car start rolling on you, before you realize it. Fortunately, my driveway's flat, so it didn't really do that. But previously, when driving the hybrids, I did get into that situation where I was parked on a slope and had it start rolling on me, before I realized and hit the brake again. That's, that I don't think that's a good design.
I wonder if it's one of those things that's sort of almost overthought, like, we're going to make it like a traditional shifter. Anything you do, you've got to pass through neutral. Like if you want to go from drive to reverse and reverse to drive, but
I think it is, and I think this is a problem that's not unique to Volvo. I think a lot of these modern electronic gear select mechanisms are overthought in a variety of different ways. They're, you've got a bunch of companies. I think this is one of the problems we have today is. Kids today. What can you say? No, as designers, as we've gone from mechanical shift mechanisms or shift selectors to electronic ones, the designers are rethinking how they work. Instead of basically emulating what we had that everybody was accustomed to that worked fairly reliably. We're getting a bunch of, whether it's push buttons or various mechanical switches or electronic switches like this, we're getting a variety of solutions that some, seem to work in some ways, but in some other aspects, I think they're definitely inferior. This is the kind of thing that also bit Chrysler, on some of their electronic shift systems. I mean, that's what the actor from the new Star Trek movie, I can't remember his name now, who he accidentally got run over by his own Jeep. He got out to check his mail, to get his mail out of the mailbox, and he thought he had put the Jeep into park, and in fact ended up in neutral, and it rolled over him and killed him. And I think this is something that could potentially happen with this vehicle if you're not careful. So I think that there are a lot of these electronic shift systems that are not as well thought out as they should be. But that's my only other real functional complaint about the XC40. The rest of it I really liked. I liked the size. The performance was good. The ride and handling compromise was good. The rear, the C-pillars are a bit on the thick side, and if you're sitting in the back seat, if you look at the XC40 in profile, you'll see that like the 60 and 90, the belt line kind of sweeps up towards the back, but it sweeps up much more aggressively on the XC40, and so sitting in the back seat, you get a bit of a claustrophobic feeling in there. But from the front, it's not too bad, although it does impact visibility. But like all other new vehicles, you've got the rear backup camera to help out with that, so it's less of a problem.
Yeah.
And the other thing about the XC40 is I found it to be when you start pricing it out, it's actually quite a good value, especially I think. When I did the first drive in the Cadillac XT4 a couple of months ago, one of the things I complained about at that time was the pricing. The base price was fairly reasonable, starting at about $37,000 on the Cadillac, but you got a lot of nickel and diming on individual options. A lot of driver assist features and other things that quickly get the price well up into the $50,000 range. And when I was pricing it out again, compared to this XC40, I found that to get it fairly comparably equipped to this XC40, it came out. The XT4 came out to about $52,000. The XC40 I was driving was about $44,500. So it's in the premium compact utility segment, it's actually quite reasonably priced, and you get a lot for that money. Oh, and one other thing that I found was a big improvement on the XC40 is the pilot assist system, which is Volvo's partially automated system that combines some steering control with the speed control. It was much improved on this one compared to any of the XC60 or the 90 or the S9 or V90 that I've previously driven. For the first time on any of those vehicles, the XC40 was actually able to the system was actually consistently able to keep the car in the lane, keep it centered in the lane, and when you're, going through a curve, at highway speeds, a freeway curve, it did not drift out of the lane. It stayed fairly centered in the lane, which is something that the previous iterations, they all started to drift. And, this is not a hands-off system, even on the XC40. It's you will, after a few seconds, if you let go of the wheel, you will get reminded to put your hands back on the wheel. But even if you're holding the wheel lightly, it will stay in the lane quite well, much better than on previous iterations of the system that I've tried.
I think they're going to just continue to refine it. Each model in the XC40, probably being sort of the newest in the line, has the newest hardware, the newest software, and it just does it, as well as it possibly can, even compared to the other models. That's my guess. I don't know.
Yep. One other thing about the XC40 before we leave it is that it's the first Volvo available through the Care by Volvo subscription package, and we'll talk a little more about subscription later. But were you going to say something?
I was just going to say they're still doing that. They're committed to it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And when the S60 comes out, and they'll be adding it, making it available on other models as well. So on the XC40, there's a couple of different levels. You can get the base momentum level and the mid-level trim. Starting at it's at $550 a month or $650 a month, and they that includes the price of the car. All maintenance, including wear items, so things like tires, wiper blades, all that stuff is all included, and insurance is also included. And you can swap out the car once a year. So every 12 months you can swap it for a new car, and so it's kind of like a lease that's bundled with the insurance and service and maintenance. but you don't actually, unlike a typical lease, you don't have to make a down payment or other payments. You just pay this monthly fee, and then every 12 months you can swap the car for another one and get a fresh car.
Yeah, well, and I think the XC40 lends itself really well to that, just because of its size and its character. It's that urban crossover, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's removing the off-roadiness from a class of vehicle that was sort of born from SUVs, but more often than not now they're for running around in the concrete jungle.
Yes, and with that little bit of extra ride height and all-wheel drive, it can hopefully tackle the potholes a little better than sedan might.
I mean, that was always the thing about it. You take like a Suburban or a Yukon or something, something large like that to like Manhattan. It's so much easier. It's a big thing.
Assuming you can find gaps to actually fit it through, though, in Manhattan.
No, you make the gaps. People get out of your way. I mean, maybe not so much.
You drive, you drive some of those side streets in Manhattan, where delivery trucks are double parked, and something the size of a Tahoe, you're gonna have a hard time getting through many of those streets.
That's true. That's true. It's not something I'd want to live with in the city, but there is something to be said for a crossover, an SUV in that environment, just because it's got a rugged suspension. It's designed to cope with a lot of the stuff that just, is so obnoxious otherwise
But so does a Crown Vic.
Yeah, and I'll just put the little light on top. People think you're a cop. They get out of your way.
Get a yellow wrap on it, or black.
Yeah, that's right. Make a little cash.
Yeah.
You don't want to be a gypsy cab. The guys who actually paid for the medallions, they won't like you.
Yeah.
You're better off just doing.
Just put a little Uber sticker on the windshield, and you're good.
Right. All right. So it's interesting that you had the Q5 as well. Not that they're exactly the same thing, but I'm interested to see what the difference or the contrast between the way Volvo does it with the XC40 and the way Audi does it with the Q5.
Yeah. So the Q5 is actually one size segment up from the XC40. So the XC40 competes with the Q3. Then the Q5, would be more of a competitor for the XC60. So it's the mid-size crossover. And the Q5, like the XC40, is powered by a turbocharged 2-liter 4-cylinder. Imagine that. That seems to be the way of the world these days. If it's not a big blown V6 or a V8, it's usually a 2-liter 4-cylinder with a turbo. And it's I think it's about 258 horsepower, if I recall correctly, in this form. So this is the same. This is a variation of VW's corporate 2-liter direct injected 4-cylinder. 252 horsepower, 273 foot-pounds of torque, and this goes all the way down to like the 174 horsepower that I complained about in the earlier this spring in the Tiguan, and then up to in the case of the Golf R, a little over 300 horsepower.
Yeah, 300.
So it covers a pretty broad spread. In the Q5, which is not exactly a lightweight. It's about 4,000 pounds. It's fine. It does plenty. It provides plenty of performance. Most drivers are not going to be at all disappointed with it. It'll do 0 to 60 in about 5.9 seconds, something like that.
That's quick.
Yeah. Well, it's no ludicrous Tesla, but it's more than enough for almost anybody.
You blow the doors off an IROC or a Mustang GT.
That's not that hard.
Those were fast cars in the day.
Yeah, in their day. but that day is long past.
Those are my sort of formative. Those are my reference points.
Oh yeah, I know. I mean, I remember reading the car magazines back in 1983 when Ford revived the Mustang GT, with a 5-liter V8, or it was really more of a 4.9, but the 302 cubic inch V8 with a puny little 2-barrel carburetor and something like 157 horsepower, and that was but I mean, that was huge back then, because when the Fox body Mustang first came out in '79, it had their downsized V8. They had dropped that.
Was that a 255 or something?
Yeah, it was like a 4.2 liter, I think, 4.42 or 4.4. It was 4.2. GM did a 4.4. And it was like 110 horsepower. It had about the same amount of power as the little 1.6 liter in my Miata. And that was the waning days of the malaise era. And the Mustang, the rebirth of the Mustang GT was that's what brought performance back to cars. And from there it just it went on. For the second year, they swapped the 2-barrel carburetor out for a 4-barrel and went to 175, and then a couple years later they added fuel injection, and today a Mustang GT's got 460 horsepower, right? And gets better fuel economy than that 83 did.
Yeah, that's the thing for me. Like those cars sort of, they tuned my inner ear for what speed is, and getting into cars now, everything's so quick.
Yeah.
The Q5, like you said, it's under 6 seconds to 60. That's. I mean, it's not the fastest thing I've ever driven, and you can sort of get used to it on a daily basis. But that's no slouch.
Oh yeah, and there's nothing to complain about here. This one's got Quattro all-wheel drive, and Audi's 7-speed S-tronic transmission, which is a dual clutch transmission. So it's basically a longitudinal version of the VW DSG. It's a wet dual clutch system. And the Q5 is a really good-looking vehicle. I really like the design of it. It was one of the first of the current generation of Audis, to adopt this new sharper edged version of the grille, a big hexagonal grille. And it's got really great proportions, for its size and everything. It's got plenty of room inside. It's a 111-inch wheelbase, so it's got good backseat room, comparable to others in its class. So the class, you're looking at models like the Mercedes GLC, the Lincoln Nautilus, the Lexus RX, and the Mercedes, or the BMW Q3 or X3. Getting all these numbers and letters mixed up.
All the numbers and letters, and we complained about names, and now all the alphanumerics are getting us all confused too. So.
Yeah, exactly. So the one of the interesting things that was different in the Q5 compared to the A4 I drove a couple of years ago is that it's got a similar setup. It's got kind of the stubby electronic shifter, but unlike the Volvo, you push it forward once from park. Give it if you give it kind of a tap, kind of a half tap, it'll go into neutral. But if you push it all the way forward, it goes to reverse. Pull it all the way back, goes to drive. It's got paddle shifters, but ahead of the shifter, it's got the MMI control knob, which I think works really well. What Audi had been doing for the last several years with the MMI is they had embedded a touch pad surface into the top of the controller, the rotary controller, and so they were doing, you could do the handwriting input, put in letters and numbers, for navigation destinations right on the top of the controller knob. They now have a trackpad in front of it, and around along the forward edge of the trackpad, there's some kind of buttons there. They're marked, they're numbered, 1 through 6, for your radio station presets. So you can just tap on there and get your radio presets. And then on either side, there's a little area that's kind of marked off, to swipe to one side or the other on the screen. But this is the first vehicle where I've tried the handwriting recognition on a touch surface, where the response is so much faster now than on anything that I've tried before. It's the first one I've tried where I think it's actually useful, because you're not sitting there waiting between each number and each character you input. It basically is almost instantaneously recognizes and goes on to the next one. So this is the first from any brand that I've tried where I would actually seriously consider doing it that way if I wasn't using voice recognition with Android Auto. And the Q5 does support Android Auto and CarPlay, and the control is through the control knob, so no touch screen in the Q5. Really nice screen. Everything looks really good, crisp, bright. I was really pleased with driving this vehicle.
And are you driving that now, or was it just around?
I dropped that one off this morning at the airport before flying down here to Miami. So that one's gone. I've been driving it for the past week.
I was just wondering if you've had the contrast between Michigan roads and Miami roads.
No, I didn't drive that one down here to Miami. So I'm here in Miami for an event with Ford. They're doing demonstrations tomorrow with their automated vehicle program. So we're going to be riding around in Ford's automated vehicles around Miami here and visiting their depot where they're doing service and maintenance on the vehicles and seeing some of the various things that they're doing, that they're trying out with these vehicles. And one of those things is something we'll talk about later on. But what about you? What have you been driving?
So last week I had the Kia Stinger GT2, and it's just very good. I've been really wanting to drive the Genesis G70, which I think shares the platform. So this was a nice preview of that. And I wanted to just echo your complaints about the shifter, like in the Volvo and in the Audi. The Stinger has confusing gear shift too. You got to push it forward to engage reverse, which always seems weird to me. Partially because I'm just trained over years of driving. The park is at the top, and you pull down or pull back or whatever to get the other gears. But in practice, I wound up putting the thing in reverse when I really wanted park for the first couple of days, because park is a button, but you go forward with it, right? And so that I think is just something we're all going to have to either get used to, or they're all either going to have to standardize it. I would perhaps like a standard, because it's confusing jumping from car to car. It's less so when you have the car and you drive it every day. But I think that is just, it's like needless. It opens the door for needless error, I suppose. To have every car be slightly different. But, overall, the Stinger is it's a great car. It's kind of a shame. I'm thinking they're not going to move too many of these, just because sedans aren't that popular. And that's kind of a shame. It sort of follows the pattern that the Chevy SS just did, right? That was around for a few years, and now it's gone.
Yeah.
and we all liked it, but not enough people liked it to buy it, and that's
this one is more likely to stick around for a while, because the platform that it's using is going to be used for other stuff. The SS was the last model built off of the old Holden designed and built Zeta platform, I think, which was from the old Pontiac G8 and the last Holden Commodores. So this was done down in Australia, and that platform is gone, and GM's Australian manufacturing presence is gone now too. So this one, the the Stinger and the G70, that platform is going to be used for other stuff, including some utility vehicles, almost certainly over, in the next year or so. So we may be lucky and keep these two models around for a while, just because the architecture that they're built off of is still going to be used for other products.
Well, it'll make a really good utility vehicle. It makes a very fine sedan, or actually not even a sedan, a hatchback.
It's a 5-door hatch.
Yeah, and Kia has really just done it right. It's very well executed. The design is fantastic. It comes out of their Frankfurt styling headquarters, I think, which is Peter Schreier, who spent years at German automakers as well. So inside and out, it's very distinctive. It's very tasteful. It has that classic long hood proportion, and the fastback roofline, it hides its hatch well, which I think is actually to its benefit, even though the hatch is really handy, and I like hatchbacks, and I think it's just a really smart way to utilize that space in an otherwise, that would otherwise be wasted in a sedan. So that's good. It makes the car more useful, and with a car like this, that's actually a plus, because it removes it beyond the realm of like just a fun time car. You could use it as a family car, and still get your jollies with it when the road gets curvy. The funniest thing to me was that a couple of my coworkers saw me pull in the morning with it, and they were very impressed with the flashy red sedan, and they were like, "But it's a Kia." And they started doing that whole Kia thing.
Who cares?
Right. And I was like, that is
it's a Kia is actually a great thing about a car these days,
right.
Because they have been on top in the JD Power initial quality surveys for the last 2 years. They're doing great in long-term durability surveys. Kias and Hyundais are fantastic cars, and they are among the best vehicles made today.
Well, that was my explanation. I said it doesn't matter, and that doesn't hold up anymore. It may be a $50,000 Kia with the GT2 is it's all-wheel drive. It has all the options. It's just the priciest Stinger, which makes it a tremendous value. It drives like a $75,000 BMW. It's solid. It doesn't have any bad habits. It's very forgiving in terms of just the way it drives. It handles well. It rides with discipline. I did find that with the turbo, so there's two engines with the Stinger. There's a turbo 4-cylinder, and then there's the twin turbo 3.3 liter V6. With the V6, there's a little bit of turbo lag in some like transitional situations, which I was a little surprised by. But what happens is you give it a poke and you will get all the boost.
Yeah.
Maybe at a time you were not expecting it, like a little after you would have found it useful. So you'll be in the initiating stages of a tight turn, and then you get more power, and you got to be ready for it.
They're giving you a little bit of that old Porsche 930 feel.
Yeah, I like it, but I'm not surprised.
Is yours rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive?
Mine was all-wheel drive,
okay.
But it's definitely rear biased. You can feel it rotate. It rotates properly. It's got a proper chassis, and I'm not surprised because of that behavior that you're seeing them pop up at auction with nose damage, like insurance auctions. It's just, but I like that. I like that sort of element of like, oh, you got to treat this thing with respect, and it certainly just. It's such a. What it really reminded me of is this is just a really great E39.
Yeah.
And that's a compliment, because people have been chasing that car for 20 years. And, this is really just, if you just want a car that's just good to drive and it's comfortable, the back seat's a little tight, but it's useful too. This is what your modern day enthusiast sports sedan is. And I keep calling it a sedan just because that's sort of what it purports to be, even though it's a hatch. And it's going to make a really entertaining utility vehicle if they can keep it doing the same thing with a little bit more ground clearance.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that they will be quite successful with that, and I'm looking forward to see what Kia and Genesis come up with off this platform. Imagine Genesis, what, probably a GX70 or GX60 or 80, whatever they end up calling it. You know, as a real sporting utility vehicle, to take on the likes of an X3, probably X3 or X5. I guess X3 size probably.
Well,
Yeah.
it's not tiny.
Yeah.
It's got a kind of a long stretch. I didn't look at the wheelbase spec, but it's got some presence, and I think that's what impressed people who initially saw it. It's good looking, and it
Yeah, I mean,
definitely looks aggressive.
when they first showed it last year at the Detroit Auto Show, it really grabbed everybody's attention. I mean, nobody was expecting this thing, and especially when they announced that the thing was called the Stinger. It was definitely the star of the show last year.
Yeah, and it's you can't buy a better or much better car for the same money. You can buy something that's different, but even in GT2 trim, where it'll push 60 grand, it might even go a little bit over. It's still a really good deal, I'm trying to think of the stuff that bugged me was the shifter. I did notice that, especially on a cold morning, moving it around in the driveway, just like down the apron of the driveway and stuff. It seemed like you could hear the doors and the window glass kind of shifting around a little bit against their seals, which would indicate, like, is the body structure twisting or what's going on there? But out on the road, it feels real solid. So I'm willing to just give that a pass. And it's not the only car I've had that has done that. And the infotainment, you need to use the voice commands with it. It's a much better experience. If you are poking at the screen with the buttons, the touch screen, it's not quick or efficient enough. So you learning to love the voice commands, which do work well, is going to be your key to infotainment bliss in the Stinger. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to criticize a car that drives that well,
Yeah, I mean, I certainly can't complain about it. I was really pleased when I drove it. I guess was it earlier this year? Yeah, and really pleased with it. I'm looking forward to trying out the G70 in the not too distant future.
I know. I was gonna have a manual.
Yeah, that'll be a surprise in a Genesis. The last one the only other previous Genesis with a manual was the original Genesis Coupe.
Yeah, and I drove one of those. It was not that refined.
No, it was kind of fun, but kind of rough around the edges.
Yeah, it was a little. Yeah, it needed a little bit more finishing school.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move on. We were talking about the Volvo subscription program, but GM has decided it was all in and then all out on subscription. It was really interesting. I just listened to an Autoline episode. It's probably a couple weeks old, but they had the president of the National Auto Dealers Association on, and he was explaining that the subscription thing it's something that all the automakers are trying, but there's not a real clear path forward to profitability from it. And taking it from a dealer, I'll take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. But it's a question about, it seems like it's a premium level service, and so you're shutting some customers out, and then it's not necessarily something that can be profitable. And I think that's what GM kind of learned, right? A little bit was that just Book is not going to work for them.
Well, yeah. So Book in its original configuration is not going to work. They've suspended the program for now. They've said that they are going to come back with a subscription program, but they're going to rework it. And I think when they're talking about issues with profitability with subscription, one of the things we've seen over the last year and a half or so, about a year and a half since Book launched, GM was the first one, to launch this kind of subscription program, first automaker to do it. And we've seen other manufacturers come up with a variety of different variations on the theme of, paying a flat monthly fee, and, at various intervals being able to swap out the cars for different cars. Book was kind of took it to an extreme where you paid a flat monthly fee. I think it originally started at $1,500 a month. They later raised it to $1,800. And like the Volvo Care by Volvo system, that included insurance and maintenance on the cars. The difference with Book was that it gave you the option to, at any time, you could swap, you could select any car from the Cadillac lineup or any vehicle from the Cadillac lineup. So that meant, you could take ATS, CTS, XTS, CT6, XT5, or Escalade, and you could even get the V series models, the ATS-V and CTS-V, and so depending on what you wanted to drive on any given day, you could swap out, if you wanted to take a family road trip, you could get an Escalade, or if you wanted something a little more practical, yeah. Well, depending on the nature of your family, that could be the appropriate solution. Depending on where you want to go. I mean, if you want a road trip to, say, Monticello Motorsports Park, things like that.
Yeah, there you go.
So the issue with and others, some manufacturers did something similar to that. Porsche, for example, Porsche Passport, they did a similar thing. They actually split it up into two tiers. The base tier gave you the option to choose from the Boxster Cayman or the Macan, and you could swap out at any time. And then the more expensive option you could also include the Cayenne, the 911, or Panamera. And the problem with all of those, is you had, particularly for those two brands, for Porsche and Cadillac, you had fairly limited lineups of vehicles. And there's actually a lot of cost associated with, for the dealers and for the manufacturers with doing that kind of program where you can swap in and out of cars at any time. Because, there's a lot of complicated logistics with, picking up cars, delivering cars, getting them cleaned, getting them prepped before they go on to somebody else.
Just ask the guys that have to drop off the cars to journalists.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, it gets very expensive very quickly. So, that's why those programs are fairly expensive, because they're trying to find the right price point that people would be willing to pay for it, but where you can still actually cover all your costs. So they were problematic programs. And again, for the customer, you also had some fairly limited lineup of cars to choose from, especially with Cadillac. There are other companies. There's a company called Clutch, which is based out of Atlanta, and what they do is they actually work with dealer groups. So they'll get a group of dealers together covering multiple brands, and they will put together a pool of cars, vehicles of various types, ranging from small cars to midsize, SUVs, pickup trucks, and they put together like 3 different pricing tiers. So for more mainstream models, mid-level models, and then more premium brands, and doing this similar kind of thing where you could swap in and out any time, but now because you have the option of, for example, picking a pickup truck. If you need a pickup truck for a weekend, to go pick up some building supplies, or you want an SUV for a ski trip, or you want a car for your daily commute. You have, for the customer, you have more flexibility in what kinds of vehicles you want to choose from. Again, you have the same issue with costs and logistics of managing the program. So they're not cheap, and it's not clear what the path to profitability is. And then you've got more restrictive programs like what Volvo is doing. Volvo only allows you to swap out once a year. Lincoln has got a program that they're piloting where you can swap out the vehicle every month. And you can choose from any vehicle in the Lincoln lineup. And then the pricing depends on which model you choose. So you, rather than paying a flat monthly fee every month, you may be paying, if you choose a Navigator 1 month, you're obviously going to pay more than if you then the next month switch to an MKC or an MKZ. But you still have some flexibility there, and it's a little easier to manage for the dealers that are participating in the program. So far, none of these have gone national or really widespread, and we'll see. I think the most popular one so far has actually been the Volvo program, the Care by Volvo. And Volvo is trying to limit it to about 10%. Between 10 and 15% of their sales on the XC40, while they gradually try to grow the program and make sure that everything is working and that they can actually be profitable doing it. But we'll see. I think we'll see more experimentation over the next few years as manufacturers and dealers try to figure out the right business models as the business changes, and the auto industry changes.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're definitely trying to find what works for the modern idea of car ownership and usage. I'm just curious, though. It feels a little short-sighted. It feels a lot short-sighted. Basically, you're creating this fleet of rental cars. And we all know what happens to rental cars once they have lived their rental lives. They go and they get sold at kind of depressed resale value. And I'm wondering if they're trading, long-term value retention for short-term subscription. You know what I mean? Like, aren't they sort of harming their brand in the long run?
Potentially, and that, this is part of the reason why most of these programs have only been available on a very limited basis so far, because they're trying to understand, what is that impact going to be, if they do this, how are the customers going to accept it? What kind of plan do they like? And, what's going to be the impact, on these cars coming back to the manufacturers, after they've been in service for a year or two. I think in most cases, what's more likely to happen, especially for the premium brands, is they're more likely to get refurbished and be sold off as a CPO, a certified pre-owned model, as opposed to just going straight to auction. Because there's definitely more profit in the CPO business than just selling to auction or the traditional straight up used car sales.
Yeah, I certainly, personally, I wouldn't have a problem buying a used ex-fleet car. You know that it's had lots of miles put on it. It's been shaken down, and because it's a fleet car in that sense, it's been maintained as well. So it wouldn't bother me, but there's just going to be a bunch of them on the market, and they're going to have to get bought by someone. So I don't know. I think it's GM, and not so much, but maybe Ford too. I see automakers they're kind of grasping around at stuff. And, like Ford in particular, they're investing in scooters and bikes and stuff that's not cars.
Yeah.
And their cars are kind of old now, so.
Well, the cars are going away anyway. It's just going to be Mustangs and SUVs and pickup trucks going forward.
Yeah, well, and the pickup truck, I know there's a new F-Series coming. They're working on that. They're not stupid. They know what their bread is buttered on.
Oh yeah, and the Ranger, just started production a couple of weeks ago. They'll be hitting dealers in the coming weeks. The Broncos coming up, new Broncos coming up in 2019, and there's going to be a bunch of other new crossovers and SUVs coming next year. And actually, we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to listener email. But why don't we move on? I think there's still much to learn, from these subscription programs, and we haven't seen the final variations of these yet. So we'll see a lot more experiments. But speaking of experiments and failed experiments, Faraday Future, which apparently has no future.
Well, I don't know. They just so over the last couple of weeks they've had a bunch of executive departures and stuff that just like one of the co-founders decided to take a hike, and that's never good. And by the time you get to your co-founder leaving, it's probably a pretty good indication that you're not going to make it. But I saw it today, and I don't know the details of the story. I thought they just got some sort of investment as well.
Did they? I don't.
I'm not sure how deep it is or what, but the last I saw in passing on Twitter was that they are getting some sort of cash infusion. But either way,
I can't see anybody, necessarily, being. I think anybody with some sense would probably not want to throw more good money after bad. I'm just pulled up Sean O'Kane's latest story from earlier this afternoon. I don't see anything here, but I don't think he's. I don't think they've gotten any new money, and
I may be in error.
Okay, I know. A year ago. Last year at CES in 2017 at CES, they had their big shit show press conference, which was just a total farce. And they were at that point they were planning to build $1 billion factory in North Las Vegas, and that completely fell through. They never got further than just moving some dirt around on the lot. They eventually abandoned that. By the end of 2017, they were pretty much out of money, and then early this year, some Chinese investors came through with what was supposed to be an additional $2 billion in funding, and part of that deal was that Jia Yiteng, the CEO, was basically supposed to be sidelined. He had been seen by most people as the root of the problems at Faraday, and he was supposed to be sidelined in this deal, and he apparently was not thrilled about that. And if we'll put a link to the coverage that Sean O'Kane's been doing for The Verge, which has been really good. He's been doing some great reporting on this, but basically they got their first tranche of money from Evergrande, the Chinese investors that were going to put the money in there. It was about $800 million earlier this year, and they have evidently burned through most of that by July. Then they were not meeting their commitments, and the investors did not want to put any more money in, and over the last several weeks they've laid off much of their staff, cut the salaries of most of the remaining staff, and it's just been a complete mess. And I know at least one person I know of, one friend that went to work there back in June of this year. He left about a month ago and has taken another job. He was doing PR there. He's moved on and taken another job. Moved back to Europe to take that job, and that's Matt Davis. And then I know a couple other people there. I'm still not sure what their ultimate fate is, but I doubt that they'll be working there much longer. And I wouldn't be surprised if the plug simply gets pulled in the not too distant future.
Oh, so I found the little blurb that I had seen. Apparently, it's just there's an offer for $900 million over 3 years via indirect STO, which is a security token offering.
Oh boy!
Right. So
anytime you're token offering or coin offering, that's going to be not going to be a good outcome.
Right. No, that's why I was like, oh, okay, so it's like Bitcoin. Awesome. We're going to just have the global distributed spreadsheet of, whatever.
So basically we're talking Faraday, no future.
Yeah. And so, like, the other thing about Faraday, too, is the car is beautiful, right? The actual, like, the vehicle.
Yeah, it looks
well
really
done.
good.
But they're not exactly Tesla, right? Like, Tesla, at the very least, for all their warts, they really innovated, and they have their own unique technology. Tesla power electronics, very good. Tesla motors, very good. Their battery software, very good. There's a lot of stuff that they do that only they do. And it's not like the days of the 20s and 30s, right, where there were lots and lots of automakers and they were all buying the same pieces from everyone and just assembling the cars and putting a brand on it with some unique styling, right? There's this vast wasteland of brands from that time that weren't anything special. They were just the parts assembled and with somebody's name on them. And that almost strikes me like what a lot of the now sort of fledgling EV companies are doing. You've got, Faraday Future, where they were buying the stuff from suppliers and...
Well, they were buying batteries,
right?
and stuff from suppliers. But, I think they had hired, 2.5 years ago, they hired Peter Savagian from GM as their VP of powertrain engineering. And, Pete, he had a long history at GM, going back to the EV1, and he had a lot of patents to his name, and I think that they were probably working on some stuff on the powertrain side, the power electronics and the motors, that was probably just that could have potentially been as good as anything that Tesla was doing. I'm confident that given the opportunity, Pete Savagian definitely could have done that. That said, who knows what would have actually come out of this, but it would have been interesting to see them get a real shot, but I don't think that's ever going to happen now.
Well, I'm sure that what's actually going to happen is the pieces will get picked up and the people will go elsewhere, and
many of them already have.
Right, will arise. The talent and the lessons learned will sort of infiltrate other companies. More than one. It's kind of like if you ever read the book Fire in the Valley, just sort of the fledgling sort of Silicon Valley, mid 70s to early 80s. With the rise of personal computers. It was like this free-for-all, and just the companies popping up and failing, and people just going from one of those to another, and finally getting to this point of stasis after 20-plus years. So we're in that, again, just that churning of companies trying things and failing, and so 15 years from now, it's going to be really, really different and interesting, and we'll have some viable manufacturers.
I hope so. That would be nice.
All right, so let's jump down to we talked about Ford and Walmart and AV. They're going to do deliveries, which they're trying to just take people out of cars.
Yeah, well, what Ford is doing is they're trying to create an end-to-end transportation solution, or provide end-to-end transportation solutions. So they know that they're going to be selling vehicles for conventional vehicles for a long time to come, as are other manufacturers. The bulk, it's going to be a while before, and quite a few years yet before automated vehicles really become mainstream and become, comprise the bulk of vehicle sales and deployments. We're talking, not till, into the 2030s before they start to reach a majority state. But in the meantime, as they try to get these vehicles out on the road in the next few years, Ford and other companies are, looking at the business models around these vehicles, and they're looking at, transportation as a service, mobility as a service, and trying to see how they can generate as much revenue as possible, and that means, utilizing the vehicles as much as possible. So, part of that, they, last year about a year ago, they did an experiment with Domino's in Ann Arbor with, looking at the potential for delivering pizzas with automated vehicles. And they were evaluating the user experience around that, how customers would interact with the vehicle, an automated vehicle delivering a pizza to them. And then earlier this year, they, when they launched their development, their testing program here in Miami, they announced that they were going to be continuing to partner with Domino's as well as with Postmates and with Lyft. And, they're developing this service platform, this logistics platform to tie in, multiple companies and, so that multiple companies can have access to these vehicles to utilize these vehicles for doing various kinds of deliveries, picking up customers, moving customers around. And trying to get the vehicles used as much of the day as possible and generating revenue, so they're not just sitting around idle. And the latest part of that is bringing in Walmart. So Walmart, their next test that they're starting is using these vehicles, or evaluating the ability to test or to deliver groceries from Walmart with automated vehicles. And Walmart, a few months back, announced a deal with Waymo as well. So they're doing some experiments with Waymo in Arizona. Again, utilizing Waymo's vehicles to when customers order their groceries online, they would staff at the Walmart store would package them up, and the Waymo vehicle would go pick up the customer, bring them to the store. They'd pick up their grocery order and then take it home, or perhaps stick around, do some other shopping at the store while they're there.
That always seemed weird to me. It's like, why is it taking the person to the store? Why isn't it taking the stuff to the person?
Well, this is one of the things that they're trying to figure out is, okay, if you just have the vehicle and you pack the groceries in the vehicle goes off. How do you, if you have an unmanned vehicle, how do you get the groceries into the house? You have to schedule it when somebody's at home to get the groceries, because somebody's got to take that stuff out of the vehicle. Do you deliver it to their office, or what do you do with it? So they're trying to figure out what's the best way to make this whole system work. So it's not just a matter of putting the groceries into an automated vehicle, but then what happens once it gets to the destination? And so they're trying to figure that out right now. And so the vehicles that they're actually going to be using for this test with Ford are not actually going to be automated. It's going to be like the Domino's vehicle, where it's got sensors on it and everything, but there will be a human driving the vehicle. But they'll be using the sensors, using cameras and stuff to look to record how people interact with the vehicle. Are they willing to come out to the curb to get their groceries? Or how's that going to work? Or in different weather conditions, if it's raining, are people going to want to come outside to get their groceries? I mean, they do that today. When you go to the grocery store, you take your groceries from the trunk of your car and take them in the house, right? How are they going to be willing to do that with an automated vehicle if the stuff's being delivered? Normally if you're getting something delivered, they bring it right to your door, not just to the curb. How's this going to work for people living in an apartment building? So they're trying to understand all this now, before they're ready to do a full deployment. So they want to figure out what is the best overall procedure for this. What kinds of groceries are reasonable to deliver in this way, what kinds of products can be delivered this way. So there's a lot of questions that they're not quite sure what the answers are going to be, and so that's what this test is all about.
I'm confused. There's a lot of this sort of testing to like take people out of it, right, and make everything a convenience. Where do all the where did all the jobs go? And I'm just thinking, like, Walmart's done a pretty good job, like, killing Main Street already. Do they really need to kill, like, delivery jobs too?
Well, I mean, this is one of the interesting things, that they're trying is, even before we get to automated vehicles, Walmart's also working with Postmates, and I think by the end of the year they expect to have post deliveries available through Postmates from 800 stores in 100 cities around the U.S. And part of this, think about it. If you go to the grocery store, and you're buying some produce or you're buying some meat, you usually spend a little bit of time, looking through the produce, picking out the stuff that looks good. You don't want the wilted lettuce. You want the one that looks nicer and is in better shape. You want the steak that's got some nice marbling in it, nice fat on it. And so part of what they're doing already, even before the automated vehicle stuff, is they've got these. They're calling them personal shoppers in the stores. That when you place an order online, then they will go and select all the stuff for your order and package it together. So, they're doing this stuff in the store. Now, presumably at some later stage, as this gets up to scale, they're probably going to automate a lot of that process as well. But, at least for the time being, they're still utilizing people in this process somewhere. And then, when you do get to automated vehicles, there's a lot of other areas where where people are going to be needed, for cleaning up and maintaining the vehicles. And, there's all kinds of things that need to be done with the vehicles as well. So I think, this is all part of all of the unanswered questions around this technology. There's a lot of potential benefits out of automated driving technology, but there's also a whole lot of questions that we don't know the answers to yet. And this is what everybody's trying to figure out right now.
Yeah. I'm just confused about where it's actually going to shake out. And as a consumer, when everything gets a little bit overly automated, like, it sounds like a luxury too. Like, I'm going to have my personal shopper shop for me. Some of that, I guess, like, there's certainly parts of the economy and just parts of society that some people feel like shopping is a chore, right? It's just like they feel like driving is a chore. So, all right, I get it. What do you do otherwise? Like, I like going to the store. Like, I
hear you.
I went to Home Depot over the weekend because I had to do something around the house, and they've replaced a whole bunch of cashier lanes with the self-scanning checkout things. And so now they have one person manning a bunch of stuff where you're providing the labor, and it's almost like in some instances, you're providing the labor and you'll pay more. Not in that particular instance, but like, it boggles the mind when you start to like think about what is actually happening. Like, wait, they've removed staff and I'm doing the work, but the prices continue to go up. Like, what the hell?
I hear you. And this is part of why. This is part of some of my. I have some skepticism around all of this stuff. I think that there's still a lot that we don't know, and I think we need to experiment with some of this stuff to figure out what are actually going to be the consequences, and it only once we actually try it will we really understand the real impact of this technology.
Yeah. Well, now that I've just sounded like a complete old man, told everybody to get off my lawn. It'll be interesting, and we'll see how it works out. And if we're all eating pre-selected food that's just lovely, and we have more free time, then I don't know. We'll do something else, right? We'll make better music or write better books.
We'll be able to sit around and think of stuff.
Sure, that's
think
the
big thoughts.
Is right. And I just love all the think pieces about like, well, robots are going to take our jobs. Work will be obsolete. It's like, we've heard that before.
Yeah,
I don't think that's going to be the case.
I wouldn't worry about that anytime soon.
Yeah, I'm not throwing away my tools.
Yeah.
All right, so we had some some emails and some interactions on Twitter that we wanted to get to.
Yeah, so let's go through the emails first. First up, we had Clay, who's asking. He said he loved the old Autoblog podcast and followed us to Wheelbearings. Thank you, Clay. His friend Brett has a 2015 Edge Titanium with the 3.5 liter V6 and front wheel drive. Lives in Birmingham, Alabama, and rarely has snow, but he's hankering for more power. The Edge is the smallest vehicle he's ever had and doesn't desire to go smaller. Previous vehicles being an '07 Tahoe LTZ, a loaded Expedition, and an Explorer Eddie Bauer V8. He really likes the looks of the Audi SQ5 in and out. I do too. It looks good. Likes the interior and ride of the BMW X3 after spending some time in one, and is liking the look and power numbers of the forthcoming Edge ST. But the price hike and lack of major upgrades to the interior leave him wanting to keep hunting European. I've encouraged the 2.7 liter Lincoln Nautilus. Being miserly myself, I'm hesitant to recommend anything European due to maintenance and repair costs. Clay has a loaded 2016 Fusion Hybrid that he loves. His friend has a short commute, about 10 miles round trip. Fuel mileage isn't critical, but cost of ownership long term is important, as he usually keeps his cars for more than 5 years and doesn't want to lease. So he's looking, $45,000 to $50,000 price range. What crossovers and utilities are we not thinking about, with emphasis on power, then interior features, then sporty looks? Feel free to include cars forthcoming in the next 2 years, as he plans to wait until he finds something he just can't pass up. Certified used can be considered, but isn't ideal. Thanks in advance. We'll be listening. So, first thing, he mentioned in this question here, the SQ5, which kind of starts at about $57,000. So I think that's kind of, at least for a new one, that would be out of your price range of 45 to 50 grand, unless you want to go for a used one. The Nautilus, I've driven the Nautilus and it's really good, but I think that it's given what he's described, the other models he's described here, I think it's probably not the right character for what he's looking for. I think it's got good performance, but I think it's not really the right character here.
Well, he's already got an Edge.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So,
and as good as the Nautilus is, it's basically a fancier Edge. And it's also going to be on the high end of this price range. As I was reading this question earlier, the thing that came to my mind is, since he'd probably prefer something a little bit larger, is actually the new Explorer, which is coming next spring. It's an all new model. It's based on a completely new architecture. It's Ford's new rear drive based unibody architecture, and it'll also be available with all-wheel drive. I'm pretty sure it'll be available at least with one of the Nano V6s, either the 2.7 or the 3 liter twin turbo V6, possibly also the 3.5 twin turbo. So I think that is probably the one I would suggest maybe waiting for. What about you? What do you think?
Well, I was actually going to ask what you thought the Aviator was going to start at, because it sounds like there's some affinity for luxury, and the Aviator is just we're going to see the production version at LA, right?
Yeah, in a couple of weeks.
The concept.
Yep.
Man, that concept was just beautiful. So if it comes close to the concept, it's going to be nice. I'm assuming it's probably going to be outside of his price range.
I would guess it's probably going to start in the mid 50s and go up from there. So, probably the way he might want it, is probably going to be closer to, 65, 70 grand.
Right. That was my thinking. Is like you might be able to get one to start within your price range, but it's probably not going to be with all the goodies.
But the Expedition, or the Explorer, is on the same platform as the Aviator.
Right.
It's going to be roughly the same size, and it's definitely going to be a far superior vehicle to the current Explorer. And so I think I think that is probably one worth maybe waiting for and taking a look at next spring.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I'm trying to think of what other stuff. I really, really I really like what Acura's done. I kind of like everything they make, especially the A specs. So, an MDX A spec is, and I had that last week, I think, and we talked about that a little bit on the podcast the last time. It's powerful-ish, but it's not like, it doesn't have a twin turbo engine or anything like that. So that may not be your cup of tea.
But what you might want to consider is the MDX hybrid, which is really more, more performance oriented. And that one's going to be a little more powerful. That's going to be in that 350 horsepower range total. It's a 3-motor hybrid, so you've got 2 motors on the front axle along with the engine, and 1 on the rear axle. So I would take a look at that one maybe.
Yeah, that's the sport hybrid, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. He's kind of covered all the bases with all of the usual suspects, like Audi and BMW. It's like, go drive those things. See if you like them. I tend to like the Acura stuff just because it's more about chassis discipline and handling, and it has enough power to entertain you, but they're not super overpowered or anything like that. So. Report back. Maybe we're getting closer to the mark, or at least just let us know what you think of those cars. And, we'll stab at it.
If not the MDX, the RDX is also another one, that's worth taking a look at. It's a little bit smaller. I guess it's a little smaller than the Edge, but it's not quite as powerful as some of the other ones you're talking about here. But it really has that sporting feel. And I think that you might find yourself enamored with that one if you take a look at it. So I would check out the RDX A spec, and it's right in the lower end of that price range, that $45,000 range. And then also consider waiting until the new Explorer comes out in the spring.
Yeah. So let us know if you have any.
And if you really want to go, totally insane, you could always go for a Grand Cherokee Trackhawk.
Grand Cherokee SRT is
700 horsepower.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. But I owning a Grand Cherokee, and now it's got 100,000 miles on it. I'm not sure that is a $60,000 vehicle. And I know the Trackhawk has more than that too, but
yeah, it's about 90.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure that it's actually built in accordance with the way it costs. Not that it's bad. Don't get me wrong. I love the Grand Cherokee, but that's a solid $40,000 vehicle.
Yeah. But it's a Hellcat.
I know. The SRT is in there too. You could also forego the Hellcat.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And that drives well.
It does. Yeah, it drives really well. All right, next up, let's see. We had from Tim, poor seat comfort in the Jetta Sport Wagon. Tim likes the podcast. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. He recently, in March of this year, purchased a 2013 Jetta Sport Wagon TDI post-fix, and overall enjoys the car. For the first time since driving, I find the front seat in the Jetta to be extremely uncomfortable in any drive over an hour. I think we had somebody else complaining about this recently as well. He's tried all the different settings, lumbar adjustment, seat height, location, steering wheel, and seat, but nothing seems to help. I believe the main issue is a lack of proper lumbar support, not enough movement in the lumbar region, and the short lower cushion length. I have tried adding a lumbar support foam pillow, but it still bothers me. Is there anything I can do besides trying to get an aftermarket seat or finding another car? Any advice would be greatly appreciated. Previous cars he's owned, 92 Infiniti Q45, very nice. 2003 Beetle TDI, 2003 Honda Pilot, and a 2007 TSX, which is his wife's car. So I think, maybe the easiest thing, the easiest thing to do would be if you can find a seat from a GTI, which should bolt right in there.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Is like put GTI seats in it.
Yeah, the thing to do there would be, maybe go over to the VW dealer and actually try out the GTI seat and, see if you like that any better. And then if you do, then start, searching pick and pull lots, scrap yards, and see if you can find a wrecked one and pull the driver's seat out of it and put it, and that
Make
should
sure they
bolt
don't
right
have
in.
blood on them.
Yeah, well, there's that. Yeah,
You can,
you can always put
you
seat
could actually
covers
go to,
on.
like, right, that's true. LKQ is a big recycler, and you can just go to their site. I think it's like car-part.com, and you can look there for the seats and find them, and you'll find them in various states of quality. Some of them will be a little bit blemished, some of them will be fine, and they'll tell you how much they are, how many are close to you. So that whole thing would be what I would suggest. Is just go find something that'll bolt in, because it's not like that car's on a unique platform. That's the cool thing about platform sharing, is just how much stuff fits.
That's right. And then, of course, the other option is an aftermarket seat. As far as the seat that's in there, there's not a whole lot else you can do. I mean, if you've tried a lumbar support cushion, if that doesn't work for you, that's pretty much all you're going to be able to do really with that seat that's there. But like I said, replacing it with a used GTI seat is probably your best bet.
Yeah, and the other difficulty you're going to find is that aftermarket seats are very expensive to come near the quality of a factory seat.
That is true.
So,
yeah, I mean, you're, for something like a Recaro, you're probably looking, in the $1,500 price range. Certainly upwards of $1,000 for any kind of decent seat. Whereas if you can find one from a wrecked GTI, you can probably get that for a few $100.
Yeah, and your back comfort and longevity is, you can decide what that's worth. Okay, that's fine, but not having a DVT or something is worth a couple grand to me. But seats are one of those things, and it's hard to really get a good feel for how it's going to be on a test drive, right? Because you're doing maybe 10 or 15 miles on a test drive. So, that long-term hours in the saddle kind of thing is something that can only come out really after you own the car for a little while, and you hopefully it doesn't lead to too much buyer's remorse and you can get it solved.
Yeah. On the other hand, since he already owns a Jetta, he already knows, where the problem areas are for him, in terms of the way the seat fits him. And so, if he goes and hops into a GTI for a test drive, he might be able to, within a fairly short period of time, he might be able to get a better idea if that's going to fit him better than the base Jetta seat does.
True. Yeah, that's true.
All right. And finally, we have from Peter Saras. He's recently discovered the show and he's very much enjoying the insights.
Is he talking about our show?
Two topics that he... Well, presumably, I mean, he did send it through our website, so send this message. He says two topics he doesn't recall being addressed. Very much appreciate if you could either address these in future podcasts or point me to sources that go into more in depth on those. With all the efforts and discussions about autonomous mobility, there's surprisingly little time spent on developing infrastructure such as roadside tags or even in-surface guide wires that would be much better suitable for machines rather than going through all this trouble of designing machines to understand human signs, lines on the road, etc. There would be absolutely significant cost, but is it really cheaper to maintain painted lines and design all this crazy computing to follow that? Never mind that wouldn't work for half a year up here in Canada anyways. Related, do you know why the efforts to design vehicles communicating to each other seem to less and less be on the forefront of any communicated progress about autonomous vehicles? I'll address that. There's actually two questions he's got here. I'll address that first. So as far as relying on infrastructure, this is something that we've tried in the past, especially back in the 90s. There was a lot of work that went into what we called at the time intelligent vehicle highway systems. There were experiments done, with embedding tags in the roadway. There was a big experiment that was done down near San Diego, doing exactly this. GM participated in it. They had a whole fleet of vehicles that were running, autonomously, following tags that were embedded into the roadway. The problem with this, as you mentioned, there is a significant cost associated with doing that and maintaining it, and especially, in cold weather states, maintaining those kinds of things, anything that's going to go on the roadway, when you've got frost heaves and you get the road moving around and you've got trucks driving over it, it becomes very difficult to maintain such a system. The other problem with it is a lack of flexibility. One of the reasons why we've shifted away from doing that to trying to design vehicles that can drive anywhere is, if the car has to follow a guide wire in the road, then what happens if it has to switch lanes? What happens if somebody's double parked and you have to go around it? You're going to tend to inherently limit the routes that you can drive in doing this. There's actually, in a lot of ways, a lot more complexity in doing this, and a lot less usability of a system that's based on that. So this is why they've gone to systems where the vehicle, everything's embedded in the vehicle, and the vehicle is trying to understand its environment. It has a map and knows where it's trying to go, and just as a human driver would do, looking around at whatever obstacles it has and trying to deal with those. And ultimately, that's probably going to be a better solution, or at least a more useful solution. It may in some ways be less robust, but it's going to be more useful to people. And then the other part of that is vehicle-to-vehicle communications. This is something that a lot of manufacturers are still working on. Unfortunately, there was in late 2016, there was a notice of proposed rulemaking to establish a mandate for vehicle-to-vehicle communications here in the U.S., but that fell by the wayside with the transition to the new administration, which is adamantly opposed to any and all regulations. And so for at least the duration of the current administration in Washington, it's unlikely that we'll see any progress from that perspective. But manufacturers are continuing to work on this. Toyota earlier this year announced their intention to deploy V2V across their entire vehicle lineup starting in 2021. GM has said they're going to do it in 22 or 23. There's also a question now about which technology to use. All the development up until now has been using technology called DSRC, Dedicated Short Range Communications, which is based on Wi-Fi. There's some companies led by Qualcomm and Huawei in China that want to use cellular technologies instead. And I could go on for several hours about this, but I won't. But needless to say, it's not dead. It's not the top priority at the moment. They're more focused on automation, but I think that communications is actually going to be a crucial component of making automated systems more reliable and robust. One other thing about this question, you mentioned, living in Canada, relying on lane markings and so on wouldn't be viable in the wintertime. Actually, this is one of the things that the companies doing this stuff have been working on is because there's going to be a lot of situations where you've got roads, especially residential roads that don't have lane markings, or if they're covered with snow or water or whatever it might be, where you can't really see the roadway. What they're doing is they're using a combination with high definition maps that have all the features around the roadway plotted on the map, and so things like light poles, utility poles, buildings are all on the map. And so as the vehicle drives down the road, the sensors are looking, and it's doing creating its own map as it drives down the road based on what the sensors see, comparing that to the stored map, and using that to localize the vehicle. And doing that, they can actually get much better location accuracy of the vehicle down to a couple of centimeters accuracy, so down to about an inch or less of location accuracy, even when the vehicle can't see the roadway. Last year, Ford was doing some testing in Michigan during the wintertime in the snow. They had at the M-City test facility in Ann Arbor, they had done an HD map of the entire facility before the snow fell, and then once it was snowing, they were able to easily drive around, and localize the vehicle much better than you can do with GPS. GPS, you're at best about a meter of accuracy as far as the localization, but with doing it based on the HD maps, you can get down to under an inch of precision for localization. So those using the sensors is a better, more reliable approach than using road tags. And then the other question he had was understanding the pros and cons of plug-in hybrids. One point I haven't heard talked about is the stability of fuel. In a plug-in hybrid scenario, it's expected the majority of travel is done in short commutes in purely electric mode, and the ICE system is only used occasionally for longer trips. So here, this is something the engineers have thought of, and well,
they try.
They miss stuff. I mean, you always miss stuff. You can never anticipate every scenario. But this is a scenario that they did anticipate, and they did figure out. When the original Chevy Volt launched back in 2010, they developed what they called maintenance mode. On the Volt, and they've done similar things on other plug-in hybrids. On that Volt, they had a sealed fuel tank, so that there was less oxygen getting in and out of there, and oxygenating the fuel and causing it to start decomposing, so that it helps stabilize the fuel. And then the other thing that they would do is, typically on a plug-in hybrid, you have a smaller fuel tank, typically 9 to 10 gallons at most, so that there's not as much fuel in there. And what it'll do is, over time, the system will periodically run the engine, even if you are charging the car all the time and using it in electric mode all the time. It will periodically run the engine, in part to circulate the fluids in the engine, the coolant and the oil and everything else, but also to consume that fuel. And I know in the case of the Volt, the original Volt, it had about a 9.5 gallon fuel tank, and over the course of 12 months, if you did not put any additional fuel into the tank, it would consume the entire contents of that tank over the course of a 12-month period. If you added more fuel as you were going along and mixing in fresh fuel, then it would stretch out that time period. But it's still periodically running the engine for a few minutes at a time here and there to use up a bit of the fuel. And so that's how they address that problem.
Well, all right. To me, the idea of a car that follows the stuff in the roads, and then like the idea, having it be able to deal with those situations like you were talking about where something's double parked, and the answer is not, well, we'll just make it so that other cars can't double park in that spot, because basically what you've done is you've created trains.
Yeah.
So, and that's fine. We need high tech trains too. But yeah, I think that there's so much emphasis on making cars autonomous because it's a novel solution that can solve a lot of issues that have been unsolvable to this point. So it's gotten traction, and I think it's going to continue to be refined. Where trains are kind of a known quantity and they're very expensive to do, and you can get a lot of that benefit out of
an actual train.
Yeah, or actual trains. Yes.
Yes, and actually, real trains actually do it better, because you actually have more people in there potential to carry more people in fewer vehicles and more in less space, and it's actually a more efficient solution for high density routes. This is one of the things with mobility, the mobility services is that we actually need multimodal transportation ecosystems. It can't just be autonomous vehicles. It has to be a mix of scooters and bikes and buses and AVs and trains and subways, and utilizing the right mode for every trip, in order to actually start making any progress on problems like congestion.
Yeah, what's with the obsession to have one single solution? I don't get it. What's the matter with multiple solutions?
There's nothing wrong with multiple solutions, and that's I don't think that that obsession is not universal. I think that there's a lot of people who. And Ford is a good example of this. This is why, and other manufacturers too. This is why they're investing in things like bike sharing services, and why Ford bought Spin, a scooter rental company, and why they have why they bought Chariot, which is a micro transit service, a van ride service. They're trying to do this end to end ecosystem, to get the right mode for every trip. And as I said, they are not unique in this. VW is doing this. GM is doing this to varying degrees. Toyota and other manufacturers, and even Google and Waymo.
Yeah. So keep writing in. Let us know how we did with your car picks. Let us know if you have any follow-up questions. I think we have knocked down a podcast. So join us next week, and in the meantime, find us on social media or email, and let us know how we're doing. And
if you feel like giving us a rating in iTunes or somewhere else, please do that too, and let your friends know, and share the show. And to anybody that I have encountered in my various travels that we've talked about, that has listened to the show, thanks, and hope you keep listening. Bye.
All right. With that, have a good night.
Everyone's talking about AI these days, right? This season on Compiler, we're diving deep into how AI is reshaping the world we live in. Join us for a new season of Compiler, an original podcast from Red Hat. Subscribe now, wherever you get your podcasts.
All you homeowners have unique needs. Some feel the need to leave up holiday decorations year-round. Others have the need to use their garage as practice space for their new metal band. And because each homeowner has unique needs, Geico helps you get the right coverage for your home and what's in it. That way, you get exactly what's right for you, even if your needs are unique. Get more with Geico.